this is Jim. This video is a beginner's guide to how to record a musical group in a small space, typically the room you normally practice in. And if you're new to this, it probably sounds sort of trivial. You know, why don't I just put like a cell phone or a mic in the middle of the room, hit record, and there it is. I mean, that's us playing. But it turns out that doesn't work very well. And the reasons are that, number one, unless you happen to be in a sound studio, which is probably not likely, the sounds that microphone get will be largely echoes. And different echoes will be off different walls and different distances and arrive slightly at different times to the microphone. So the sound will end up blurred, particularly acoustic instruments sound funny that way. It's also difficult to get the right volume for the different voices and instruments unless you're very careful about how you position people. And then, of course, if things change in the course of the music, they have to move in and out. So it's very difficult to record that way. And so I'll give you an example. I'm going to play the same a recording session exactly, one with just a room mic. Now, we weren't trying to move ourselves around. This is just what, if you put a mic in the middle of the room and turn it on, this is what you get. And then I'm going to play it again, except I'll have recorded each of the instruments and vocals separately and then mix them back together, and you'll see how different that is. So the first case is just a room mic. You know, that's a recording, and you can tell what we were singing, but it really doesn't sound at all professional. So here's the exact same thing again, recording everything separately.
I am an old woman named after my mother. My old man is another. Child is grown old.
Okay, that's better. So one thing you notice, of course, is that the vocal is now front and center and very clear. Also, each instrument, we're now hearing instruments we didn't even pick up before, like the drum in the background is now quite audible. And if you're listening on headsets or with a good stereo system, you'll be able to hear the exact position of each person or instrument in the stereo field. And that adds a lot of depth to a recording. It doesn't sound as much like a recording, it sounds more like you're there. So having that stereo separation is really important. And the only way to get that is to record each channel separately. So I'm going to take you through the real basics of it. This is an overview just to get you started. But talk about the different kinds of microphones there are and which kind are appropriate for this situation. How to connect instruments like keyboards and guitars directly rather than going through a microphone. The kind of recording equipment you'll need, different ways to capture the data, and then a few quick tips about what you do once you get that data, how do you create the mix. So let's start out with microphones. There are two basic kinds of microphones. The first kind I'll talk about are these condenser microphones. And these require power, 48 volts, sometimes called phantom power. And the power comes typically from the mixing board or audio interface that you plug it into. And once they're powered up, these are incredibly sensitive. And also, most of them, like this one, will collect sound in a big area. So you don't have to have precise mic placement. They'll capture it wherever it is. And so these are really good, like if you're recording just your own voice, or if you're in a situation where you want to record the echoes, like you're in a chapel, and you want to get a high fidelity recording, these are great mics. They're also great outdoors because they're so sensitive. However, they're also sensitive to things you don't want to record, like airplanes flying by, motorcycles, leaf blowers, etc. So, watch out what you wish for with sensitivity. In our situation where we're recording in a small space, these are not very useful. In fact, I don't even bring them because the sensitivity actually works against us. We don't really want sensitivity. What we want is to get each instrument and each person recorded separately. And the kind of microphone that works best for that is a dynamic microphone. This is the most common example, the Shure SM58. There's thousands of different makes and models. Now, these are less sensitive. They don't require phantom power. You just plug them in. And they also typically have a fairly narrow cone of where they collect the most sound. And so if you put this in front of a vocalist or in front of the sound hole of a guitar, they'll capture primarily that sound and not much else. So these are great for getting us away from the echo problem and giving us a clean signal for each instrument and voice. And so these are the kinds of mics that I use for recording in a small space. Okay, so we talked about mics. Now the mics don't do anything unless you have someplace to take their signal. And so there's a couple ways to go here. One is to buy what's called an audio interface, which is a place to plug in all your mics, and then it takes that combined signal and sends it over to your computer, usually a laptop. And then in the computer, we actually do the physical recording of each track to disk. So that's one approach. The other approach, what I do, is to use a hardware recorder. This is Zoom R20 is the one I happen to be using. And so the mics plug in here, and when you hit record, the data is written to a little flash memory card, which holds an infinite amount of audio. And so it makes it much more like a tape recorder. You hit record to stop and hit play to end, and you can do that for as many songs as you like. Now the number of channels that I can simultaneously record is limited by how many connections there are up here. So this particular unit has 8. And so that means the most I can do is 8 combination of instruments and microphones. For the groups I work with, that's just fine. These knobs right here allow me to adjust how much amplification the raw signal from the microphone gets before it goes to the card. And that's nice. You always want to get as rich a signal as you can without clipping. Although, frankly, with these modern digital recorders, the noise floor is so low that it's much less of an issue than it was in the old days when we were recording to tape. Now you notice that 2 of these connectors are a little different. These will accept either the normal XLR mic cables, or you can plug a 1/4 inch, like a guitar cable, directly in. And that's very handy. For example, electronic keyboards have a 1/4 inch output, and you can plug that straight in, so you don't need to use a microphone, and you get this perfectly clean signal that without really any distortion at all. You can also do that from acoustic guitars that have electronics built in. Most do these days. So this particular guitar has electronics, and there's an output right here in the bottom. If I plug a 1/4 inch cable there, I can plug it straight in, and that will give me the signal, again, without going through a microphone. Now with electric guitars and basses where they're going through an amplifier, the amplifier will have in the back, if it's a good amp, will have a DI out or a mix out. And that's a place where you can get the signal right before it goes to the speakers. So with all the EQ settings and pedal boards, whatever, you get that signal right before it goes to the speakers, but bypasses the speakers And again, you can put that right into the whatever audio interface you're using. And again, that gives you a very clean signal without going through a mic. I always prefer that kind of an input if I can get it, just because the signals are so perfectly clean. You may run into a situation where you've got, as I often do, I've got more instruments than I have 1/4 inch inputs. And the way to get around that is these DI boxes. You put a 1/4 inch cable in one side and you get XLR out the other side. So it does that conversion for you. And then you can plug this in just as if it was a microphone. So that's another way to get a direct connection without going through a microphone, which again, I strongly prefer. Okay, so we talked about collecting the data. Now, to actually create your recording, you're going to need some sort of software. It's called DAW, or Digital Audio Workstation Software. There's all sorts of vendors out there. There are some near free and public domain versions, like Audacity is in the public domain, and I used that for a number of years. The commercial software like Cubase and Ableton or Reaper and all those things, they all have stripped down versions, I'd say crippled versions, which are available for demo. And you can try those software packages out without spending too much money. And if you decide you like them, you'll probably find out you want the features they've left out. I've ended up using Cubase, but it's not an endorsement. It's a matter of personal taste. Anyway, once you get your data in, you'll have as many tracks as you recorded as separate tracks in your DAW. The first thing I do is to what's called normalize the tracks, which is to bring them up to the same average volume. So you're sort of dealing with equals to start with, and normalization does that for you. And then once you've got them at all some level, like minus 10 dB or something like that, then you can start adjusting the volume of individual tracks, individual sections to make the mix you want. Now, the other thing you probably want to do is to somewhat compensate from the artifacts that occurred during recording with microphones. And as I mentioned, these are not chosen for their sensitivity. In fact, we didn't really want highly sensitive for this particular situation. And so there's two things you're going to probably want to do. One of them is to compensate for the tendency for it to record mostly the louder sounds and to diminish the softer ones. And the fix of that is called compression. And so you put compression on the track, and that will tend to adjust it back to what it would have sounded like if you were in the room at that moment. The other thing you'll probably want to do, and it's a little bit paradoxical, is we eliminated almost all the echoes by the way we recorded, and that's going to sound dry. It's going to sound oddly flat. And so what you'll probably want to do is put a little bit of artificial reverb into the track. I typically use about 20% reverb just to mix in a little bit to make it sound like the recording was done in a room. Anyway, it's funny that we go to all this trouble to eliminate echoes and then we put a little bit back in, but that's what works. Now, mixing is a subject all to itself, and I can't hope to touch it, but in the process of practicing this, you'll find out you have a lot of flexibility as to where you put instruments, how you treat them. You can put in dynamics that the artist didn't originally put in that add a lot of spice to your recording. Mixing is a lot of fun. Okay, I think that's enough for an introductory video. I really encourage you. I find recording and creating mixes is very rewarding, and the people I do it for really enjoy it. I think we all learn a lot and become better musicians just by hearing what we've created. All the best.